Thank you so much for joining us again, because now it starts the most important part of the W7 2022, the handing over of our recommendations towards the G7 President and His Excellency, the Chancellor Scholz. But without further ado, I will hand over to our President, the President of the National Council of German Women's Organizations, Dr. Beate von Michael. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Juliane. Your Excellency, Chancellor Scholz, dear Chairwoman of the G7 Gender Equality Advisory Board, Professor Almendinger, dear Women7 representatives, dear colleagues, allies and friends, distinguished audience. It is a great honor for me to welcome you to the W7 Summit, Your Excellency Chancellor Scholz, today. The G7 presidency is a major opportunity for Germany to deliver on its feminist foreign policy agenda and to promote the rights, resources and the representation of women and marginalized groups. With your attendance, you are prioritizing this agenda. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Beate von Michael and I'm the president of Deutscher Frauenrat, the National Council of German Women's Organizations that represents 60 national women's associations and organizations. And I'm proud that we are taking our advocacy to the international level and hosting this year's Women7, the civil society dialogue on gender equality to the G7. Germany's G7 presidency in 2022 comes at a time of global crisis. The war in Ukraine, the climate crisis, and the COVID-19 pandemic. We are deeply concerned about the violent effects these overlapping crises have on women and girls all over the world. And here are some numbers. More than 5.5 million people have fled Ukraine since the war began, according to the UN Refugee Agency, and the majority are women and children. Up to 80% of the 21.5 million people fleeing due to climate-related disasters are women. With the pandemic, it will take us at least another 136 years to close the overall gender gap. And indeed, this is where the G7 countries have to act. In this historical moment, the G7 presidency brings with it a special responsibility to recognize the gendered impact of the current intersecting crisis, to enter in dialogue with civil society from all over the world, as we kindly do today, and to lead the world towards a gender-just economic and political transition with bold political and financial contributions. It is high time to see action, to see results and clear commitments by the G7 on gender equality. Time to deliver for a gender-just world has been the rallying call of the Women7 in the last months. We have learned from experience how vital it is that G7 gender commitments are subject to accountability mechanisms. Their progress must be tracked and evaluated. Women7 brought together an international network of feminist civil society advocates that developed a set of powerful demands on gender equality to the G7. I want to highlight here that 1/3 of our Women7 advisors comes from the Global South. For us, this is crucial. G7 needs to open to the voices from the Global South. We very much welcome the collaboration of the 4 G7 partner countries of this year: India, Indonesia, South Africa, and Senegal. At the same time, more efforts are necessary to include further countries and groups, in particular feminist civil society, and to provide the financial resources that allow for their meaningful involvement. At Women7, more than 60 advocates from 24 countries discussed and elaborated their most pressing demands on G7 leaders in a multi-stage consultation process over several months. And today, I'm humbled to present to you the priorities of our network of renowned feminist advocates condensed in the W7 Communiqué. Before the handover, I would like to take the opportunity and highlight our main demands. At Women7, we call on the G7 leaders to ensure meaningful participation and representation of women and girls at all levels of decision-making, to apply gender equality as a cross-cutting principle and to use instruments such as gender impact assessments to address structural discrimination, to implement gender-responsive budgeting globally and domestically to make the gendered impacts of budgets visible, including on unpaid care work, to invest in sex and gender-responsive intersectional data generation, and finally, to introduce an accountability mechanism that tracks and reports about the progress towards gender equality in the G7. Your Excellency, Chancellor Scholz, the German G7 presidency aims for progress towards an equitable world. With this communiqué, Women7 offers you the tools to achieve this goal. We even included an implementation plan with concrete political and financial goals and indicators. It is all in here. Now we need you to support us in this. Let's use the G7 to really transform the system for sustainable solutions and gender equality at the heart of them. It is time to deliver on a gender-just future. Now, it is my pleasure and great honor to hand over the W7 communiqué to you as G7 President.
Sehr geehrte Frau Dr. von Miquel,
Dr. von Miquel,
sehr geehrte Frau Professor Almendinger,
Professor Almendinger,
sehr geehrte Damen und Herren,
ladies and gentlemen,
für Ihre Empfehlung.
thank you very much for your recommendations. We will take a close look at them in preparation of the G7 summit in Elmau.
G7-Engagementgruppen sind die
The Women7 are truly something special among the G7 engagement groups. They represent the interests of half the population. You are the voice of civil society standing up for women's and equality policy, and you take a stand for the LGBTIQ community. And there is also another special thing about W7. You are not only looking at topics important to women and girls in the G7 states. You understand yourselves as the voice for 4 billion women and girls across the globe. This is in line with the ambition of the German G7 presidency to look beyond the G7 members only. This is why I have also invited the heads of state of India, Indonesia, Senegal, South Africa and Argentina to the summit in Elmau. You, as the W7, have even gone further in your approach. You have involved representatives of a whole of 26 countries, and among them many countries of the Global South. And this is necessary, because human rights are universal and indivisible. If women's rights are violated in one place in the world, it affects us all. And vice versa. Progress made in one place can make the whole world benefit. I'm thinking, for example, of the exemplary fight of women's rights activists in Latin America fighting against domestic violence. So it is a very good thing that the women's rights movement has always been a symbol of cooperation and international solidarity. Thank you very much for your engagement. In your recommendations, you rightly point out that the big challenges of our time and our answers to them are not gender neutral. By the way, they have never been. On the contrary, what's often described as gender neutral usually means nothing else but by male standards. It starts with the history of humankind that for a long time has mainly been researched and documented by men. It continues with medicines largely approved and tested along male standard values, construction provisions that are mainly guided by male needs, safety in cars tested with male dummies. And it has far-reaching consequences for the labor market as well, where men are often better paid than their female colleagues for the same job. And these are only a few examples. There are countless more from culture, science and academia, business, or the digital world of algorithms. Information and data about female needs and women are less often collected, analyzed, and factored in accordingly. The author, Caroline Criado Perez, established the assumption that women in our world were basically invisible. This is quite a sobering and also a frightening observation in the 21st century. The perspective of women needs to be factored in all fields of life in equal terms. This is why I support the call for more involvement that is found all over the W7 Communiqué from the bottom of my heart. And I'm aware of the fact that politics as well needs to catch up on many things. The fact that in Germany we have a 50-50 cabinet of men and women for the first time now should not even be a headline in 2022. It should go without saying. It should be a normal thing. 50% of humanity must hold 50% of power. And a strong involvement of women on all decision-making levels, especially in executive positions, is needed. The G7 in particular need to live up to that standard. After all, we understand ourselves as a community of democratic values, and the principle of equality is one, if not the essential pillar of any democracy. So gender equality also must be the goal of any democrat. We are clearly lagging behind in this field in Germany, but in many other countries as well. This is why I have always been a proponent of a gender quota. In Germany, we have enshrined this in a law on promoting women in leadership positions, amongst other things, and we have largely expanded that law a year ago. By 2025, we want to reach parity in leadership positions in the public service. We will take a close look at whether we will get closer to our goal of reaching equality between men and women in this decade. What is important is to detect shortcomings, and we will add a new tool as G7 to help us detect such shortcomings. I'm talking about a monitoring mechanism here that will be used to strictly monitor our own progress in terms of equality as the G7, and it goes back to a recommendation of the Gender Equality Advisory Council of the last year that you are also highlighting in your recommendations. Much still needs to be done, and we've seen this in these 2 years of the COVID pandemic that hit women substantially harder than men. Surveys show that women have shouldered the lion's share caring for children while schools and daycare institutions had been closed, and the pre-existing gender care gap has exacerbated during the crisis. As the German government, we want to take more targeted action, for example, by wage compensation for people taking taking time off to care for relatives in need of care. It is about better recognizing unpaid care work and show real appreciation and respect. We will improve working conditions for unpaid care work that is often shouldered by women. It is a question of respect. And of course, this task does not end in the wealthy G7 countries. In many developing countries, it is especially women and girls who do a lot of unpaid care work at home in caring for others and childcare, and that goes to the detriment of the economic empowerment of women. So the topic also played an important role on the agenda of G7 ministers for development who met last week. Together, we want to strengthen the nursing care sector in partner countries, for example, by the Global Alliance for Care. The pandemic has also reinforced misogynistic trends in all our countries. As sad as it is, for women, the most dangerous place often is their own home. And for me, that means that the state needs to better protect those affected. Their rights need to be at the heart of our measures. In Germany, we will expand the support system of counseling, women's shelters and other protected spaces. But actually, we need to start much earlier to prevent violence against women. I am thinking of what we see on the internet and in social media on a daily basis. Again and again, women are becoming the target of sexualized forms of hate and incitement. So we want to make sure that the Istanbul Convention is implemented in the digital sphere as well. A coordinating body that is to implement this convention is intended to start their work at the end of the year. We want to create a German-wide legal framework for protecting every woman and her children from violence. If we speak about violence against women these days, our thoughts are, of course, with the women and girls in Ukraine. Once again, we have to witness that women are particularly affected in wars and conflicts. I am thinking of those who become victims of sexual violence, as had been the case in Bucha and other places where Russian troops raged. I am thinking of those whose partners are fighting in the trenches or have fallen. I'm thinking of the millions of women who had to flee to the EU with their children and their parents and basically start from scratch here. For me, it is absolutely natural that we do everything we can to welcome them here and offer them good prospects. At the same time, war crimes, especially against women, must not go unpunished. As G7 states, we support the legal examination and prosecution of such crimes and see how we can improve accountability for human rights violations, including sexual and gender-based violence. We are working relentlessly for the implementation of the agenda Women, Peace and Security. We have long known that women are needed for lasting and inclusive peace processes. There are many other topics that you have set on the G7 agenda as the W7 that are worthwhile talking about. For example, climate change. Especially the climate movement is and has always been marked by women, and we might talk about this in our discussion later on. But let me share one thought to wrap up, because it is very important to me. The women's rights activist Marie-Elisabeth Lüders once said about the state of equality, if you don't continue fighting, you might lose what you've already achieved. In the US, women have to fear that the Supreme Court might reopen a 50-year-old groundbreaking case on abortion rights and might reverse it. So it was important for me that we in Germany have finally deleted paragraph 219A of the Criminal Code. That we finally deleted it. It was a timely moment. It was the paragraph prohibiting doctors from providing information on abortion. But the discussion about para 219A shows progress does not fall into our lap and rights are never carved in stone. They need to be defended again and again, also in free democratic societies. And it is not enough to only prevent regresses. We need forces for progress, progressive forces, pooled also in the W7. Thank you very much for your great commitment for the work that you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We are truly humbled that you are taking the time and will have a seat at our table for a turn. So thank you so much. We prepared a couple of questions, but before we start with this, I will obviously introduce our panel to you, because I just realized we have 3 people representing our 64 advisors, but coming from 6 countries in these 3 people. So what you'll learn later on. If you take a look at the screen, we asked the audience at the beginning of the day, what is the most important thing that needs to be done to achieve gender equity? And I think the most words can't be read from here because it's so much that needs to be done. I think it's a clear message. But in the center, we can read feminist foreign policy, invest in care, create decent work, fund public services. And I think this just really describes what we discussed in the last 2 days very intensely. Put money in the hands of women and invest in care infrastructure. I think that's a very good start. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce my panelists here with me. And sitting right next to me, it's Marie-Claire Capotier. She is both from France and from Côte d'Ivoire, I'm sorry. Thank you so much. You're an activist and founder and the executive director of Les Orchidées Rouges, and you campaign for the eradication of female genital mutilation and all kinds of gender-based and sexual violence. So good to have you here. Thank you so much. And sitting next to her is our W7 advisor, Sini Maria Heikkilä, from Finland, now living in the UK. And you're a senior advocacy advisor at the Sherry Blair Foundation for Women in the UK, and as I said, originally from Finland. She leads the implementation of the foundation's advocacy work to promote women's entrepreneurship and economic empowerment. Thank you for being here. And last but never least, our advisor, Shervan Hussein from Iraq. She is a gender specialist who primarily focused on gender-based violence prevention and related topics at large humanitarian organizations in Iraq, and now works in the Norwegian Church Aid. So as I said, 6 countries, 3 people, I think that's a good thing. So Marie-Claire, I think we just start directly. We have 2 rounds of questions prepared for you. So we have the first 3 questions, and then I would like you to answer those. Okay? So Marie-Claire.
Thank you. Chancellor Scholz, I'm very honored to ask you the following question. Some G7 countries have already adopted or intend to adopt a feminist foreign policy. This means a radical shift in foreign policy, and now which is in view with the war in Ukraine, an even bigger challenge. How do you, as G7 president, intend to promote this radical shift in foreign policy toward a feminist foreign policy with concrete actions?
Thank you. Sini, would you just follow up?
Thank you very much. And Your Excellency, welcome to the Women7 Summit. Thank you, Juliana, for the warm introductions. I'd like to make a comment on women's economic empowerment, if I may. So women's economic empowerment has been a key priority for the G7 in recent years, especially through initiatives from development finance institutions focused on women's entrepreneurship. And it's vital and important that the G7 continues to address the multiple diverse barriers to women's economic empowerment, including unpaid care work, including discriminatory laws and social norms, and limited access to economic opportunities. And it's also vital to include women in unstable settings and those who work in the informal sector in these initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Shan.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Thank you so much for having me here. As you touched on it in your speech, you know that the pandemic has exposed the care crisis and extra burden on unpaid and underpaid women carers. The W7, therefore, very much welcomes the focus of the G7 presidency on the given to care, including the excellent G7 conference on care. The W7 has proposed that the government should spend an additional 2% of GDP on public service providing health and care. This will ensure that women's unpaid care burden are reduced, and there is more decent work in this female-dominated area, and the care for all the community is improved. Furthermore, research has shown that the multiplier effect of such investment will increase government's tax revenue. So my question is here. What are your plans to prioritize care within the G7, and can they include this kind of social investment in their social infrastructure? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So the floor is yours.
Thank you for the questions and the opportunity to answer to your questions. First, let me say, I think it is necessary that we stick to the course. When we spoke about feminist foreign policy, this was something which was debated because many people were discussing it, were laughing at it, thinking this is not real politics and things like that. And this is absolutely not true. Because if we look at the situation in the world, we see any day, we see all the days that there are a lot of problems that could not be managed if we don't understand the situation of women and if we are not managing to change situations. And as you know, I have already had a trip to Africa. I visited Senegal and I visited Niger and South Africa, and I could report from all these three countries about the debates we had on promoting the situation of women. But I will just stick to one of them. This is Niger, where the president of the country is very intensely discussing the topics which are coming from the situation of women, that there are very early marriages, that they get their children very early, that there are approximately 7 children per woman, which is now the situation of the country, and that the economic perspectives of the whole country are really devastated by that situation. So he is doing a lot of political proposals, which is, I think, really a very risky activity. But he is saying we have to change that situation. And one of the attempts to change the situation is to better the situation of women and having a better chance for them to get education at schools and attending the school for the whole time and not just 2-3 years. And then having a chance to reduce to change the situation again. He addressed a big congress of 1,000 women, he told me, and saying that they should, together with him, work on that situation and get make some progress feasible. But this is really tough politics, which is important for all of us to do. And so I think it is necessary that we say we will not change this. And when we are discussing about war, this is not something different to this strategy. I already mentioned the consequences of the war, especially for women in Ukraine. And we have to understand that it would be a big mistake to believe that this is nothing that is important for the things we are going to do. I think it is necessary that we discuss about jobs and how they are paid, that we discuss about equality of paying for women and men. And there is still a big task to do. I often said in Germany, when I started with politics in my 20s, I thought that this would be something that could be solved in 10 years. And now I'm 63, and it is not solved. Yes, there had been a lot of progress, but we are far away from solving the situation. So now in my 60s, I say it should be the 10 years and we should be successful now with a lot of very strict regulation that we could implement in our country to get there. Seeing that other countries are better than we are, but also seeing that there are also a lot of countries that are not far away from a solution of this problem. So we need legislation and we need an understanding that this is of essence for a political success, that we make this progress feasible and that we have fair payments and a fair and safe environment for the regulation of women workers. And in the question of what we can do with care, I do agree. It's also about paying. We have to admit this. One of the reasons for having not enough qualified people working in the care business is that they are not paid well. This will have to do, obviously, a lot with the situation that most of the people working there are women. And if we change that situation, it's also a perspective to get more people into the job, but also developing better circumstances for the activities of women doing these jobs if they are employed, but also for their economic and professional perspectives they have in many other sectors, because solving the childcare questions and solving the care questions is good for women and men and their perspectives in our society. And so this is a very important task for politics of the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's very good to know it's only 10 more years. So, Marie-Claire, I know you have a second question.
Yes. So...
Not 10 more years, up to the end of this decade. Mrs. Albendinger, it's all okay.
My second question is the following. Progress in gender equality is impossible without the involvement of all the women and girls over the world and also men awareness. How are G7, the G7 leader and their partners doing to reduce now and in the future the real inequality for Black, indigenous, and people of color and LGBTIQ in the society?
Thank you. Chan, and please use the microphone.
Of course. So my second question is about climate. How does the G7 under the German presidency intend to advance real action and financing commitment on climate, especially loss and damage, beyond the opt-in climate club? Scotland has committed funding for loss and damage. Will the G7 let others lead on this agenda, or get out front of the issue as they are the existing club of historically highest emitters?
Thank you so much. And the last question will be coming from Sini.
I wanted to ask a little bit more about the accountability mechanisms. So true progress in gender equality requires data and a way to track it over time. And at the moment, G7 lacks a mechanism by which the fulfillment of gender equality commitments can be measured. So as you know, the G7 Accountability Working Group launched in 2009 only focuses on development-related commitments, which means that other commitments relating to wider domestic and foreign policy areas are currently not tracked by any kind of accountability mechanism. So there's a gap in the G7 monitoring and accountability infrastructure, which threatens to undermine the delivery of gender equality commitments. And I'd like to ask, how does the G7 presidency plan to advance G7 accountability mechanism? Thank you.
Please.
Yeah, thank you for the three questions. Possibly I might start with the last one. Because I had the chance to announce that we will do something like this as part of the agenda of this G7 meetings, and that we will implement it into the activities of G7. So it is necessary, but it will be done. So this is not a promise for far future. It will happen this year, and I'm very happy that we can give this report. And thank you for asking me. If we discuss about the question how we can better the world, it is necessary that we fight against all ways of discrimination. This must be a sort of, must be an aspect of politics. And this is even so when we understand that the world we are living in will become more and more diverse due to many different criteria we have to look at. But you mentioned the different ones. If we look at the questions of migration, if we look at the situation of indigenous people and other aspects, it is necessary that we understand that the world is not just painted after one model. There are many different models and ways to live, and there are many different origins. And this is also, if we look at the situation of women, and if we look at the situation of people that have different perspectives on those sexual activities, and it is necessary that we do not discriminate people, and that this is an agreement in our society we work for. And I'm very happy that on the level of this G7 meetings, and even when there are mostly just men sitting around the table, this is part of the agenda, and that there is an awareness which we can use. And in the question of climate, which we discuss intensely, it is important that we have a very ambitious aim. And it is very ambitious to say that in the midst of this century we want to be climate neutral. And this is a big task in all the different countries. It would be a big mistake if we, in the very rich countries in the G7, are the rich democracies of the world, would say that we understood that the things we did the last 200 years with industrialization cannot go on that way, and then ask the people from the global south that they have to understand that they cannot do the same. They could not raise the standard of living in their countries, and they should just understand. This will not work, obviously not. So we have to cooperate to solve this big task for all of us. And my view is that we understand that especially the richest economies have a certain task to do their things that are feasible now. And it is to change the way how we produce things. It will be necessary to go to renewable energies. It will be necessary to change the way how we produce steel, how we do chemistry, how we do building of houses and cement and things like this. And if this is going away from fossil resources, from coal, from oil, from gas, natural gas, it is a break in the way of the industrial model we have had the last 200 years. But it can be done today because we exactly know how to do it. And if you go around, you will see that all the people active in the business sectors have the concrete idea what should be the next investment to make this happen. And this is the task of us in the G7 countries and other rich economies, that they do it for serving the whole world, but also for developing with their engineers the techniques that then could be used all over the globe. And for doing these activities, for doing these investments, we need a way of cooperation. And this is what I understand with the idea of a climate club, a global and open climate club. Yes, it is sure that there will be different paths, and all the different countries will have to go different ways, but they have to go. And if we just find a way how we compare each other and understand that we are all on the right track, it could be a way to avoid what might come out of the situation also, that all countries are deciding on their necessary activities, that they impose some new duties to the companies and the business sector, and then develop tariffs and border adjustment mechanisms to save their own industry, but giving others not a chance to participate in the progress. And if we do it with a climate club which is open, we can manage that the different perspectives could be put together. So this is my view on this question.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking your time to engage with us. And we're really honored that you literally took our recommendations into your hands. So I think that's a good place for them. And we trust you to discuss this with your colleagues from the G7. And I want you to know that we also approach the other G7 members, because we know it needs to be a joint decision at the end. So we are looking forward to stay in touch, and we will be here for more advice to come and that help you on the way to finally implement gender justice once and for all. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, and thank you for your activities and for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.